I never thought online dating could turn into something so twisted. It was supposed to be easy, right? Swipe right if you like, swipe left if you don't. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to chat with, to hang out on weekends. So when I matched with Emily, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. She was beautiful in a classic, understated way. Dark brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and a soft, genuine smile. Her profile said she was an artist who loved hiking and had a cat named Jasper. Just an average person. But there was something almost hypnotic about her photos, like they were more than just snapshots, as though she was looking at you in a way that you couldn't shake off. I was intrigued, to say the least. We started chatting and everything was great. She was funny, smart, a little mysterious. She always left me wanting to know more. But there were strange gaps. Sometimes she'd vanish mid-conversation and wouldn't reply for hours or even days. Whenever I asked her about it, she would apologize and say she'd been busy with things. It was cryptic, but I figured we were just getting to know each other, so I didn't push. One evening, she finally suggested meeting up. It was spontaneous. She sent me a message around 10 p.m. Come over. She gave me her address without even asking if I was free. I hesitated. It was late, and the address she sent was in a part of town that I didn't recognize. When I tried to look it up on my GPS, it led me to a dead end in the app. I thought maybe she typed it wrong, but when I asked, she insisted that it was correct. Odd, but I was too intrigued to turn down the chance. When I got to the location, it was darker than dark. There were no streetlights, only a thin fog hanging over the road, making it nearly impossible to see. Finally, I spotted what looked like an old, decaying house at the end of a gravel path. It looked abandoned, but the faint glow of a candle flickered from one of the upstairs windows. I should have turned back. Every instinct in me was screaming to get out of there, but I was already there. Curiosity, or maybe something else, pulled me forward. I knocked on the door, and it swung open without a sound. Inside, the house was freezing, colder than outside, and the smell, damp, like mildew, mixed with something sharp and metallic. I called out, "Emily?" But my voice felt swallowed by the darkness. Suddenly, there she was, standing at the end of the hallway. Her face was mostly in shadow, but I could make out her figure. She was thinner than in her photos, almost skeletal, her clothes hanging off her in loose folds. She didn't move or speak, she just stared. I took a hesitant step forward. "Emily?" I whispered, feeling my pulse in my throat. Finally, she tilted her head, and her lips parted, but her voice was faint, like it was coming from far away. "You came?" she said slowly, almost dreamlike. She stepped back, gesturing for me to follow, and disappeared into the darkness. I felt trapped, like I couldn't leave. So I followed her, my footsteps echoing through the empty house. As I walked, I noticed framed photos on the walls, all of her. But the pictures were strange. Each one looked older, more faded, like they were taken decades ago. In one, she wore clothes from the 90s. In another, it looked like something from the 50s. And her face looked the same in every single one. My gut twisted, but I kept moving, drawn forward by some unseen force. She led me up a narrow staircase down a hallway that stretched farther than it should have. The floor creaked under my weight, the air thick with dust. And then I noticed I could barely hear her footsteps, like she was floating instead of walking. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly ajar. She slipped through it without making a sound. When I pushed it open, I found her standing in the middle of a small, dimly lit room. There was no furniture, only candles arranged in a circle around a crumpled piece of fabric that looked like a blanket. But it was covered in dust, and I realized with a shock it was a burial shroud. "Emily, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, her eyes hollow, almost vacant. "I've been here a long time," she said, and her voice echoed as if it came from the walls, waiting for someone to find me. Something clicked in my brain then. Emily wasn't alive, or maybe she had been once, a long time ago. But now, she was something else. Something lost, something that had been waiting in this house, in the dark, for years, maybe even decades. I backed away, trying to get out of the room, but the door slammed shut behind me. My hands shook as I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Her voice grew softer, almost mournful. "Don't go, please. Don't leave me here alone." And then I felt it, something icy pressing against my shoulder, wrapping around my arms. I couldn't move. Her face was right in front of mine now, her skin pale, eyes empty, mouth twisted into a haunting smile. She leaned in and whispered, "Stay. Stay with me. Forever." I don't know how, but I managed to break free. I slammed my shoulder into the door, breaking it open, and bolted down the stairs, her voice echoing behind me, calling out my name, her laughter chilling me to the bone. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, my heart pounding as I sped away from that cursed place. When I got home, I checked her profile, but it was gone. No trace of her. I tried to forget it, to convince myself it was a nightmare, but 2 nights later, I got a notification. A new match. I hesitated, but I opened the app anyway. And there she was, Emily. The same photos, the same profile, the same eerie, haunting smile staring back at me. You matched, the app cheerily informed me. And then a message popped up. You can't leave me that easily. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It started like any other match on a dating app. Too good to be true. She was stunning, looked kind and down to earth, with a smile that radiated warmth. Her name was Sarah, and from her profile, she seemed like the ideal partner. Our interests aligned perfectly. Horror movies, late-night coffee runs, vintage bookstores, you name it. She even shared my obscure fascination with urban legends and ghost stories. Her replies were always fast, as if she was sitting there waiting to respond. That was probably the first red flag, but I shrugged it off. She was cute, and if she wanted to chat all day, who was I to complain? We texted late into the night for almost a week before she suggested meeting up. The only strange part was that Sarah wouldn't give me a specific address. Instead, she told me to meet her at an old, abandoned diner at the edge of town. I had heard stories about the place when I was a kid. People claimed it was haunted, saying strange lights would flicker in the windows at night, and some even claimed to hear voices. I laughed it off. Urban legends weren't about to scare me away from meeting a beautiful girl. When I arrived, the place was pitch black. The neon sign that once read Joe's Diner was barely visible, faded with age. My heart was racing, a mix of excitement and nerves, but the longer I waited, the colder it felt outside, and not just from the night air. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the silence was thick, unsettling. The entire area felt wrong. Then my phone buzzed. It was Sarah, texting. "Come inside, I'm waiting." I hesitated. Every fiber in my being told me to leave, but I had come this far. I didn't want to back out now. Pushing open the door, I stepped inside, and the smell hit me immediately. Old grease mixed with a rotting staleness, like the place hadn't been touched in decades. A single light flickered near the back booth, and there she was, sitting with her back to me. "Sarah?" I asked, my voice shaky. She didn't respond, but I could see her long, dark hair spilling over her shoulders, her silhouette perfectly still. I forced myself to walk closer, my footsteps echoing. When I reached the table, I noticed her phone on the table, screen up. The strange thing was, the screen was showing my own profile. Photos of me, my bio, everything. She was staring at it with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Sarah?" I said again, a little louder. Slowly, her head turned toward me. Her face was pale, almost deathly, her eyes hollow and dark, as if she hadn't slept in years. But her lips curled into that familiar smile, just like in her photos. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her expression shifting from a warm smile to something darker. I tried to look away, but something held me there, locked in her gaze. She finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. "You're exactly like I imagined. Perfect." Chills ran down my spine. I forced myself to blink, breaking her spell for just a second. I glanced around the diner and noticed something on the wall behind her. A newspaper clipping, yellowed and torn, pinned haphazardly. My stomach twisted as I read the headline, "Missing woman found dead near abandoned diner." My heart pounded, but I tried to keep calm. "Sarah," I stammered, What happened to you?" She smiled wider, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "I've been here, waiting." She leaned forward, and her voice was barely a whisper. "All these years, waiting for someone like you." The air around me grew colder, and my breath fogged in front of my face. I could feel something unnatural settling around me, like hands tightening around my throat. Her gaze was relentless, trapping me, her smile freezing into something that no longer looked human. Panicked, I stumbled back, muttering, I have to go." She tilted her head, her eyes following me without blinking. "Go? You can't leave. We're perfect together. Forever." Her voice echoed in the diner, reverberating in the walls, sounding less like a person and more like a growl, something primal and angry. I bolted for the door, but my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, but it kept vibrating, relentless, insistent. As I reached the entrance, I felt the cold presence behind me, closer than I could bear. I shoved the door open, stumbling into the night air. gulping it down as if I'd been underwater. The buzzing didn't stop. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and checked the screen. A message had popped up from Sarah. "Why did you leave? I'm still here, waiting." I threw my phone into the passenger seat of my car and sped off without looking back, but the texts kept coming, one after another. "Don't ignore me. I know you're reading this. And come back, please." The messages grew desperate, then angry, and finally they stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then my phone rang. The caller ID showed her name. I didn't want to answer, but part of me was compelled to, like she was still somehow holding me in her grasp. My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally picked up. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. For a moment there was silence, then the unmistakable sound of shallow breathing. It grew louder, more ragged, like she was right there, inches from my face. Then she spoke in a voice barely recognizable, like multiple voices speaking at once. "You can't escape. We're perfect together." I threw my phone out the window and kept driving, never looking back. When I finally got home, I checked every lock, every door, every window, trying to convince myself that it was over. But at 3:33 a.m., my phone buzzed, a message lighting up the screen. It was from an unknown number, but I didn't need to check to know who it was. The message read, "You can run, but you can't hide." Since that night, she's everywhere. Every dating app I try, every profile I make, there she is. Same photos, same eerie smile, a new profile each time with a message, "Hello again, my perfect match." I've deleted all my accounts, gone off the grid, but I still feel her eyes on me every time I turn on my phone, every time I look into a darkened room. I don't know what she is or what she wants, but I know one thing. I can't escape her. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It was only supposed to be casual, just an online fling. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some fun company. So when I matched with a girl named Lily, I wasn't expecting much. She had this radiant smile, a playful look in her eyes, and her profile had all the right vibes. Funny, adventurous, just a bit mysterious. We started texting immediately. She was quick with the witty replies, and within hours, I felt like I'd known her forever. But something about our conversations was intense. She seemed to know little things about me that I hadn't shared, like my favorite songs, certain childhood memories, or even things I was embarrassed about. It was strange, but I was curious, so I kept the conversation going. One night, she sent me a message that felt different. "I wish you could see me right now." I thought she was flirting, so I replied, "Send a pic." But her response wasn't what I expected. Just look out your window." My skin prickled. I lived on the 7th floor of an apartment building. No one could be outside my window. But I couldn't ignore it. So I got up, walked over, and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Just the empty street far below, dimly lit by streetlights. I sent her a message, joking, "No ghosts out here." She replied almost instantly, "Are you sure?" I laughed it off, trying to convince myself she was just messing with me. But then, every night after that, she'd send a similar message right around midnight. "Look outside." I'd check each time, and each time there was nothing there. A few nights later, things got weirder. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint knock. It wasn't at my door. It was coming from the window. I froze, my heart hammering. I sat up, staring into the dark, and after a long, breathless moment, I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Then, Lily's text came through again. "I'm here." I stared at the message, feeling dread creep over me. I didn't reply, but she kept texting, her messages becoming increasingly strange. "Come to the window. Don't you want to see me? You're ignoring me." The more I ignored her, the more desperate the messages became. "Don't shut me out." And then, "I know you're there." One night, her messages stopped altogether. I felt a weird combination of relief and disappointment. I missed the connection we had, even if it was strange. But just as I was starting to feel like things were normal again, my phone buzzed. It was from an unknown number, with an attachment, a video. The thumbnail was a pitch-black screen. My heart thudded as I clicked play, my hand shaking. For a few seconds, there was only darkness and faint static. Then the screen flickered, and I saw the unmistakable outline of my bedroom, shot from just outside my window. The video was silent, but the camera panned slowly over the room, capturing every corner. Finally, it paused, focused on my bed. On the screen, I could make out a shadow just beyond the glass, almost like someone's face pressed close, watching me. My stomach dropped as I realized what it meant. Someone had been right outside my window, on the 7th floor. I deleted the video in a panic. shaking as I turned all the lights on and searched my apartment. I checked every lock, every window, every possible way anyone could get in, but I found nothing. For days, I stayed off my phone, refusing to check my apps, hoping the nightmare would just end. But then I started seeing notifications from her account, even though I had deleted the app. I ignored them at first, but every time I unlocked my phone, her messages were there, filling up my notifications. You can't ignore me. I miss you. And then one final message. Look at me. I fought the urge to check, but my phone buzzed again, a notification from my camera app. It was a selfie, but it wasn't me. It was her. Lily stared back at me, her face uncomfortably close to the camera, her eyes dull and lifeless, her smile stretched too wide. She looked familiar, but wrong. Her face twisted into something unrecognizable, almost decayed. My skin crawled and I couldn't look away. Then the screen flickered and I realized it was a live feed. I could see my own room behind her, just as it looked in that exact moment. She was here in my apartment, right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty, the lights flickering, casting long shadows. I turned back to my phone, but the screen had gone dark. Then it lit up again just one last time with a final message from her. I'm always watching. Story, the end.
Story number 4.
I matched with a girl named Natalie on a dating app, and she seemed like everything I was looking for. Fun, laid back, a little quirky. Her profile wasn't flashy, just a handful of photos with an old Polaroid quality that gave her an almost dreamlike look. We clicked immediately. She was hilarious, constantly surprising me with witty comments and inside jokes we somehow seemed to form within hours. We talked every day, and for the first time in a while, I was genuinely excited. She never really mentioned what she did for work or where she lived, and her photos were mostly close-ups, always slightly blurred or her back turned, standing in dark, misty woods or near the edge of a lake. It was strange but oddly enchanting, like she was a character from an old, forgotten film. After a few weeks, Natalie sent a message that was different from our usual playful exchanges. She asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I laughed, replying something like, "Only when I watch horror movies." She didn't laugh back. Instead, her message read, "I think you'd be surprised what's out there." There was something unsettling about it, but I brushed it off. She suggested we meet the next day at an abandoned park on the outskirts of town. I'd driven past it a few times, overgrown paths, graffiti-covered benches, vines overtaking old playgrounds. It was the kind of place that gave you chills even in daylight. I hesitated but told her I'd go. When I arrived, the park was empty. There was a mist hanging in the air, thick and still, like something out of a nightmare. I texted her asking where she was but got no reply. After a while, I started feeling that strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned around, and there she was. She was standing near the swings, her head slightly tilted, her figure blurred by the fog. She looked different, more fragile, somehow almost transparent. I walked toward her, calling her name, but she didn't move. When I got closer, I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Her eyes were vacant, and there was an odd shadow over her face. "Hi, Natalie," I said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. She didn't answer, just gave me a sad, almost apologetic smile. Suddenly her phone buzzed, and the sound broke the eerie silence. She looked down at it, and I caught a glimpse of the screen. It was a message notification from my name, but I hadn't sent anything. Confused, I reached for my own phone, pulling it out to check. There, staring back at me, was a message from Natalie. "I'm right behind you." I froze, cold dread creeping up my spine. I glanced up, but she was gone. The mist had thickened, swallowing the space around me, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. I spun around, trying to make sense of it, feeling the suffocating grip of fear as I realized I was completely alone. Then my phone buzzed again. "Don't be scared, it's only me." I backed up slowly, desperate to find a way out of the park, but each step seemed to pull me deeper into the mist. And then I felt it, a cold hand brushing my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see her, but there was nothing, just a chilling emptiness. Panicked, I sprinted toward the exit, but the fog seemed endless. Finally, the mist thinned and I stumbled out, gasping for air. I looked back, expecting to see her watching me from the mist, but there was nothing there. Just the eerie silence of the empty park. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Later that night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed. Another message from Natalie. "I'm still here. Look outside." Against my better judgment, I got up, walked over to the window, and looked down at the empty street. There, standing beneath the street lamp, was her shadowy figure. looking up at me with that same sad smile. She raised her hand slowly, waving an emotion that seemed mechanical, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. I backed away from the window, heart racing, hoping she would disappear. But each night, like clockwork, she returned, always standing in that exact spot, always looking up at my window with that lifeless smile. The text kept coming too, always the same message, no matter how many times I blocked the number. Don't forget me, and sometimes come back. I tried deleting the app, changing my number, even moving, but every night, no matter where I go, she's always there, waiting, watching, and every night she whispers from the shadows, "I'll never leave." Story the end.
Story number 5.
It was one of those perfect matches on a dating app. Alex had my exact taste in music, shared my love for obscure horror movies, and even liked the same coffee place I frequented downtown. His profile photo was warm and genuine, a handsome guy with a quiet smile, sitting in some candlelit restaurant. When he asked to meet in person, I couldn't help but agree. He suggested an old cafe on the edge of town. It was supposed to have closed down, but Alex assured me it was still kind of open. It was already strange, but he had this way of speaking that made you trust him, so I went. When I arrived, the place looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were dark, smudged with grime, and the wooden door creaked as I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and stale coffee, and the furniture looked like it hadn't been moved in decades. But there, in the corner, was Alex, his face illuminated by a flickering candle. He looked different in person, paler, with shadows under his eyes, but his smile was the same. "Glad you made it," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I sat across from him, trying to ignore the chill in the air. We started chatting, and just like online, it was easy. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I said. But every now and then, I'd catch him staring at me, his gaze a little too intense. After a while, I noticed the time was way past midnight. I apologized, saying I had to go, but he looked disappointed. "Stay a bit longer," he said, that smile stretching wider. "It's not often I get company." I laughed awkwardly, but his words made me feel uneasy. I told him I really needed to leave, and this time his smile faded. As I got up to leave, he reached across the table, grabbing my wrist. His hand was ice cold, sending a jolt up my arm. "Please," he whispered. "Don't go yet." A shiver ran down my spine, but I pulled my arm away. Without looking back, I hurried out of the cafe and didn't stop walking until I was at my car. When I got home, I tried to brush off the strange encounter. Maybe he was just lonely, I thought. Maybe he was just socially awkward. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of his cold stare, that freezing touch. Finally, I managed to fall asleep, but I woke up a few hours later to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a message from Alex. "I miss you already." My skin crawled. I hadn't given him my number. I checked my account on the app to make sure I hadn't accidentally shared it. But when I opened the app, there was no sign of him. His profile was gone, like he had never existed. I should have been relieved, but instead I felt this gnawing fear that I couldn't explain. The next day I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about Alex's face in that dimly lit cafe, how strange and empty his eyes had looked. Over the next few nights, things only got worse. Every time I tried to sleep, I'd get this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling a cold draft and the prickling sensation that I wasn't alone. Once, I thought I heard whispering, a faint, pleading voice that sounded like Alex, saying, "Come back." One night, the feeling was so strong that I had to check every corner of my apartment. I'd barely made it back to bed when my phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number, "I'm here." Panicking, I blocked the number, telling myself it was just a prank. But when I lay back down, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the bedside table, was a candle. The same kind of candle that had been flickering on the table in that old cafe. I don't own any candles. Terrified, I threw the candle away and tried to forget about it. But every night after that, the candle reappeared. Sometimes it would already be lit, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The messages kept coming too, always the same. "Come back. Come back. Why did you leave?" One night, desperate and exhausted, I typed back, "What do you want from me?" The reply came immediately. "To finish our date." That was it. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, hoping that putting some distance between us would break whatever bizarre connection I had with Alex. But as I was unpacking at my friend's place, I found something that shouldn't have been there. Something that sent me into a full-blown panic. It was the candle. That night, I couldn't sleep. My friend tried to console me, but even she seemed disturbed. She kept saying she felt something in the house, that she could hear faint whispers coming from the guest room where I was staying. The next morning, she handed me my phone, looking pale and shaken. "Did you leave this in the kitchen?" she asked, holding it out to me. There was a message on the screen from Alex, sent at 3 a.m. "I'm outside." I rushed to the window, dread filling every part of me, but I didn't see anything outside. My friend tried to calm me down, saying it was just a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. Finally, I returned home, exhausted, convinced that maybe if I went back to that cafe, I could put an end to this. I drove there as the sun was setting, feeling a strange sense of resignation as I parked and walked up to the decrepit building. The door creaked open, and there, in the same seat, was Alex, smiling at me like nothing had happened. "Welcome back," he said, his voice calm and cold. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and left, trying to hold back the tears. As I got back into my car, I looked in the rearview mirror and froze. Alex was sitting in the back seat, staring right at me. I never made it home. Story the end.
Story number 6.
It all started innocently enough. I was scrolling through profiles on an app called True Connect, just looking to meet someone new. I'd been on dates with some odd people before, but I figured it was just bad luck. Little did I know, True Connect would bring me closer to my worst nightmare. One night, I matched with a girl named Lily. She had soft brown eyes, dark hair, and a sweet smile that immediately put me at ease. Her profile said things like, "Loves horror movies and late night conversations," and "looking for something real." She seemed down to earth, like someone I could actually get along with. Within minutes of swiping, I got a message from her. "Hey, Marcus, I feel like I've known you forever." Her message was warm, but something about the wording struck me as odd. I chalked it up to her being friendly, though, and replied, "Haha, yeah, maybe in a past life or something. What's up?" Her responses came fast, like she'd been waiting for me. "Oh, I'm just hanging out, watching you play with your phone." I looked around my room, but I was alone. That's creepy, I thought. I laughed it off, figuring she meant she could imagine it, like she was joking about me obviously being on my phone. So I played along. "Haha, you got me. What about you? What are you really up to?" "Just watching in your blue shirt." I felt my stomach drop. I was, in fact, wearing a blue shirt. But I hadn't mentioned that anywhere in my profile, and there was no way she could know. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard as I typed, "Lucky guess." She responded instantly. "No guesses here, Marcus. I know more than you think." I was officially freaked out. I put my phone down, trying to shake the weird feeling. Then an alert popped up. Another message from Lily. "You don't need to put your phone down. I like seeing what you're up to." Okay, now I was terrified. There was no way this girl could know what I was doing. I decided to block her, so I opened the app and her profile was gone. I figured she must have unmatched, or maybe I'd somehow imagined the whole thing. But I wasn't going to forget it that easily. The next day, as I left my apartment for work, I got a text from an unknown number. Unknown. "Love that blue shirt on you, Marcus. So predictable." I froze mid-step. I was wearing the same blue shirt. My hands shook as I typed back, "Who is this?" Within seconds, I got a reply. Unknown. "It's Lily. Don't you recognize me?" I stared at the message. How had she gotten my number? How did she know what I was wearing? I rushed to work, trying to distract myself, but my phone kept buzzing all day. Messages from Lily, always describing what I was wearing, what I was doing, even who I spoke to. No matter where I went, she seemed to know. It was as if she was right there with me, watching my every move. That night, I came home, exhausted and completely on edge. I checked my apartment, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. As I headed to bed, my phone buzzed again. "Good night, Marcus. Don't forget to lock the balcony door." I nearly threw my phone across the room. I lived on the 3rd floor and had no balcony. This had to be some kind of twisted joke, right? I replied, "Stop messing with me." Her response came immediately. "Oh, I'm not messing with you. I'm watching you." I turned off my phone, determined to ignore her. I checked all the windows, all the doors, everything. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't sleep at all that night, lying in bed with my heart pounding, my eyes constantly scanning the darkness. The next morning, I turned on my phone, half expecting it to be filled with more messages from her. But instead, there was just one. "I'm closer than you think." I had enough. I decided to go to the police, but they brushed it off, saying that online harassment was common and hard to track. They told me to block the number and let them know if anything physical happened. I went back home, feeling helpless, but determined to end this nightmare. I deleted the dating app, blocked her number, and even got a new phone. For a few days, everything was quiet. I thought maybe I'd finally escaped her. But then, one night, as I sat alone in my living room, my TV flickered. It turned on by itself, the screen lighting up to reveal a dimly lit room that looked oddly familiar. It was my apartment. The screen showed the view from my living room, the exact spot where I was sitting. I stared, heart racing, unable to believe what I was seeing. Then I heard her voice, soft and eerie, coming from the speakers. "Lily, I told you, Marcus, I'm closer than you think." I scrambled off the couch, feeling a wave of nausea and terror. My eyes darted around the room, but there was no one there. Just me and that horrifying, impossible video feed. The TV went dark and the room fell silent. But then a whisper drifted from behind me. "Marcus." I whipped around, but no one was there. Just the empty apartment, the shadows stretching into the corners. Desperate, I rushed to the door, only to find it locked. The locks clicked on their own, one after another, trapping me inside. Then, I felt a cold breath on my neck and a soft voice whispered into my ear. "I told you, I know everything about you." I spun around, but the room was empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I shakily pulled it out. There was a new message from an unknown number. I didn't want to look, but my thumb moved on its own. Unknown. "You can't run, Marcus." "I'm already inside." I backed against the wall, staring at my phone in horror, the message blurring as panic set in. I had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The room felt colder, the shadows darker, and her voice still lingered in the air. And that's when the screen went black. Story the end.
Story number 7.
I never thought a dating app would lead me to fear for my life. I mean, I'd heard horror stories about catfishing and ghosting, but I never expected what happened to me. It started like any other night. Me, alone in my room, mindlessly scrolling through profiles on Match It. I'd just gotten out of a long relationship and was honestly just looking for a distraction. My thumb swiped left, then right, the faces all blending together, until one guy's profile caught my attention. His name was Daniel, and he had this intense, brooding look. Dark hair, sharp jawline, piercing green eyes, and his profile description was simple: looking for someone real. For some reason, I hesitated, feeling a strange pull. Finally, I swiped right, and within seconds, we matched. Daniel messaged me almost immediately. "Hey, Emma, I've been waiting for you." I froze. How did he know my name? My profile username was just a random alias, and I hadn't linked it to my social media or anything. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he just guessed, and replied, "Hey, that's quite a line." "Not a line, Emma. I know a lot about you." The room felt colder. I tried to keep my cool, typing back, "What do you mean? I know you love horror movies, black coffee, and reading before bed, and that you have a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon behind your left ear." My heart started pounding. These were details I hadn't mentioned on my profile, and only a handful of people in my life would know about the birthmark. I tried to play it off as a joke, typing, "Okay, how do you know all that? Are you a psychic or something?" Manual, maybe, or maybe I've been closer to you than you think. I shut off my phone, feeling a chill creep up my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just some kind of prank, maybe even a friend messing with me. But there was something about Daniel's message, the way he spoke, that didn't feel like a joke. The next day, I checked my phone and found dozens of messages from him, each one more unsettling than the last. "Did you sleep well, Emma? You looked peaceful. You really shouldn't leave your window open at night. Red is a good color on you. Wear it again tomorrow." I stopped going out of my apartment, paranoid that someone was watching me. I reported him on the app and deleted it, thinking that was the end of it. But it wasn't. That night I was alone trying to sleep when I heard a faint tapping sound. It was coming from the window, the same window I always kept locked. But the tapping didn't stop. Slowly I got out of bed and crept toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. When I pulled back the curtain, I saw nothing. Just the dark, empty night. Relieved, I turned around, only to see a figure standing at the foot of my bed. My breath hitched. It was Daniel. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and hollow, the same green as in his profile picture, but somehow empty. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I just stood there, frozen. "I told you, Emma," he whispered, his voice like a cold wind slicing through the room. "I know everything about you." I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut on its own. My heart was racing so fast I thought it would explode. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, praying this was a nightmare. Daniel's face twisted into a smile. "You shouldn't have ignored me. I've been waiting so long for you, Emma." He stepped closer, reaching out a hand. His skin looked almost translucent, as if he weren't fully there. I squeezed my eyes shut, muttering, "This isn't real. This isn't real." When I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was empty. The door was wide open. I didn't sleep that night. I packed a bag and left, staying with a friend for a few days. I thought maybe I'd lost my mind. Maybe the stress of everything was getting to me. But Daniel wasn't done with me. The next day, my friend showed me her phone with a confused look. "Hey, didn't you delete that dating app?" I stared at the screen. There, clear as day, was my profile. Only, it wasn't exactly mine. My picture was different, taken from an angle I didn't recognize, like it had been taken through my bedroom window. And the name wasn't my username, but my actual full name. Worst of all, there was a new bio. "I'm waiting for you, Daniel." I tried to delete the profile, but it wouldn't let me log in. Frustrated and scared, I threw my phone across the room. My friend suggested we call the police, but what could I say? That a ghost from a dating app was stalking me? I eventually went home, hoping everything would blow over. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I felt it. Cold, stillness. Like I wasn't alone. I ran to my room, locking the door, desperately trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then I saw it, written on my mirror in red lipstick, "Looking for someone real." My blood ran cold. I knew I hadn't written that. I scrubbed it off, hands shaking, and barely slept that night. The following morning, I woke up to find dozens of new messages on my phone, all from Daniel. "You can't hide from me, Emma. I know where you are. See you tonight." The messages were relentless, each one feeling more like a countdown. I eventually smashed my phone against the floor, desperate to be rid of him. But that night, as I lay in bed feeling watched, I realized smashing my phone wouldn't make him go away. And then, just as I was drifting into uneasy sleep, I heard it. That tapping on the window. It started slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And then he spoke from the other side of the glass, his voice muffled but unmistakable. "Emma, come let me in." Story, the end.
Story number 8.
It was late one night when I stumbled upon her profile on Hinge. I'd had a string of unsuccessful matches, and something about her caught my eye. Her name was Sarah, and she had this warm smile, soft dark hair, and blue eyes that felt familiar somehow, like we'd met before. Her profile read, "Searching for someone who understands me, someone who won't let go." I couldn't shake this odd feeling that I knew her, but her name didn't ring a bell, and we had no mutual friends. Still, I swiped right. The moment I did, it was an instant match, and a message appeared immediately. "I was wondering how long it would take you." A shiver ran through me. I typed back, "Do we know each other?" "Yes and no. You don't remember me, but I remember you." That made no sense, and I started to feel like I'd made a mistake. I typed, "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met." Her response was immediate, almost like she was waiting. "We met before, a long time ago, in high school, remember?" I stared at my screen, frowning. The name Sarah wasn't familiar. I'd known a couple of Sarahs back then, but none looked anything like her. "Sorry, but I think you have the wrong person," I replied. There was a pause, and for a minute I thought maybe she'd realized her mistake. Then another message came in, one that made my skin crawl. "Oh no, you're exactly who I think you are. In fact, I could never forget you, no matter how hard I tried." Now I was really unnerved. I considered unmatching her, but something compelled me to keep reading. "You were the one who let me go, remember? I never left." I felt a wave of confusion and fear. I hadn't dated anyone named Sarah in high school. I had no idea who this girl was, and yet her words were laced with such intensity, as if she were telling the truth. "I'm sorry, I really don't remember you," I typed. The response came quickly. "Well, I remember you, Alex. You never noticed me, not really, but I was always there, watching you." At this point, I was sure this was some sick joke, but my curiosity got the best of me. "If that's true, prove it. What did I look like?" I sent, half expecting her not to reply. Her response froze me in place. "Brown hair, a faint scar above your left eyebrow, a small silver bracelet you never took off. You loved that dumb graphic tee with the lightning bolt that you wore until it practically fell apart." I stared at her response, a knot forming in my stomach. That description was spot on. The bracelet had been a gift from my sister, and I wore it religiously until college. The scar and the shirt, those weren't details you could guess. They were too specific. "How did you know all that?" I sent, my hands trembling. The dots appeared, and I felt like they went on forever. Finally, her response appeared. "Because I was with you even when you didn't know. I was the one you never saw. I watched you move on and live your life without me." I backed away from my phone. This was crazy. I racked my brain, but there was no one who fit this description. I'd never ignored someone, never broken up with someone named Sarah. Then came another message. You may not remember me, but I was there. Until the night, I wasn't. My throat went dry. A part of me didn't want to ask, but my fingers typed on their own. What night? The night I died. The room felt suddenly colder. I glanced around, feeling as if someone were watching me. My heart pounded, but I couldn't look away from the screen. It was a rainy night. You were walking home from that party, barely even aware of the girl following you. I was watching you, even then. A memory flashed, me walking home after a friend's party, the rain pouring down. I'd been alone, or so I thought. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, my fingers numb as I typed. I don't remember anyone being there, I replied, my hands shaking. You wouldn't, but I was. I had been for a long time, hoping you'd notice me, hoping you'd feel the same. I shuddered, trying to push down the panic. I typed, are you saying you followed me that night? Yes. I followed you down that dark street. I was supposed to say hi, finally talk to you, but you never looked back. You kept walking, like I wasn't even there. And then it happened. My hands shook as I read her words. I didn't want to know more, but I couldn't stop myself. What happened? The car came out of nowhere. I was too busy watching you, not the road. I didn't feel it at first, but then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was alone, but you never looked back, not even once. I gasped. The air suddenly thick. I couldn't remember anyone ever telling me about an accident near that street, but her words felt too real. It was as if she were speaking from beyond, dredging up memories I didn't even know I had. Why are you telling me this? I typed, desperate for an answer. Because I've been with you ever since. Watching, waiting, wondering if you'd remember. I stared at the message, a chill creeping down my spine. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this impossible encounter. Then the screen glitched, flickering for a second before going dark. My phone buzzed one last time and a final message appeared. Sarah, I'm still here, Alex. I always will be. I watched in horror as her profile picture slowly faded, dissolving into static. Then it was gone. Her entire profile vanished from my screen as if it had never existed. I felt a chill wash over me, the room filled with a thick, suffocating silence. I glanced around, half expecting to see her standing in the shadows. For days after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I looked in a mirror or glanced out my window, I thought I caught a glimpse of her in the reflection, watching me with those haunting, familiar eyes. No one else knew who she was or remembered her, and even my friends thought I was going crazy. But I knew that somewhere, somehow, Sarah was still there, waiting for me to look back. Story the end.
Story number 9.
I met Rachel on a dating app called Flare. She looked normal enough, short brown hair, a warm smile, and a profile full of pictures in cute cafes and bookstores. Her bio said, just looking for someone who believes in true love. She seemed sweet, and honestly, after a string of awful dates, I needed a little sweet. We hit it off right away, and I asked if she wanted to meet up that weekend. She suggested we go to a quaint little cafe on the outskirts of town, saying she knew the owners and it'd be quiet and private. On the day of the date, I got there a few minutes early, but as soon as I walked in, I realized how strange the place was. The cafe looked like it was straight out of a different era. Old dusty chandeliers, cracked wallpaper, and a vintage register on the counter that seemed like it hadn't been used in years. It was silent, empty, save for one waitress in the corner who didn't even acknowledge me. Before I could overthink it, Rachel walked in looking exactly like her pictures. She greeted me with a hug, and suddenly, the unsettling vibe of the place faded. She was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. As we talked, I noticed little quirks. She never touched her coffee, just kept stirring it absent-mindedly, and she kept looking over my shoulder, her eyes darting to the corners of the cafe as if she expected someone to join us. Still, the conversation was good, and I brushed it off. After a couple of hours, I glanced at my watch and realized it was getting late. Wow, time flew by, I said. I should probably get going. Rachel's smile faltered. Are you sure? I mean, you could stay a little longer? It felt like she was holding something back, like she was afraid. I laughed it off, saying I had work the next morning. But as I stood up to leave, her face went pale, her hand gripping my arm. Please, don't go yet, she whispered. There was a look in her eyes, something desperate, almost pleading. I was too stunned to speak, but she quickly covered it up with a smile. Sorry, she said, laughing awkwardly. I just had a really nice time. I nodded, a little uneasy now, and made my way to the door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt a sudden wave of nausea. The room spun, my vision blurring. I stumbled back, and Rachel was there, her hands on my shoulders. "You should sit down," she said softly, guiding me back to the table. I didn't protest. My head felt like it was splitting open. I glanced around, and the cafe seemed darker, the shadows deeper. When I checked my watch, only 5 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. I tried to stand up again, but Rachel stopped me, her hand cool against my wrist. "It's not time yet," she murmured, her eyes intense, almost frightened. I was too disoriented to respond, and suddenly I felt that crushing wave of fatigue again, pulling me down. The world went hazy, and then everything went black. When I came to, Rachel was sitting across from me, looking as if nothing had happened. She smiled, her hand still gently resting on mine. "Feeling better?" she asked. I nodded slowly, but something felt wrong. The light outside the windows was dim, the sky an eerie shade of gray, like the world was stuck in twilight. My watch was gone. I glanced at my phone, but the screen was dead. "How long have we been here?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Rachel just looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Time works a little differently here," she said. I laughed nervously, hoping she was joking, but she didn't smile. "What are you talking about? You shouldn't have tried to leave." Her voice was soft but firm, like she was explaining something obvious. "People don't usually come here unless they're meant to." I stared at her, feeling a surge of anger and fear. "Is this some kind of sick prank?" I asked, my voice rising. She shook her head, and for the first time, she looked genuinely sad. "I've been here for a long time, waiting for someone like you. I don't even remember how long anymore. Once you enter, it's hard to leave." Panic washed over me. I bolted from the table, but the cafe stretched out, growing longer as I ran. Every step felt like it pulled me further into the room, my surroundings distorting. I could still see the door, but no matter how far I ran, I couldn't get closer. I turned around and Rachel was standing right in front of me. "You can't leave, not yet," she said, her voice almost gentle. "What are you?" I whispered. She tilted her head, her eyes sad and distant. "I'm just someone who wanted to be found," she replied. "And now, so are you." I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, but the door was gone. The walls seemed to close in, and I heard the distant hum of laughter, soft and sinister, coming from the shadows around us. I don't know how long I sat there staring at her, trapped in that endless, impossible cafe. Days felt like minutes, hours like seconds. Every time I tried to leave, I'd find myself back at that table with Rachel, as if the cafe itself wouldn't let me go. Over time, I stopped fighting. I'd sit with her, listen to her stories, laugh at her jokes. The cafe became my prison, and she my only company. The waitress, the empty tables, the strange shadows that flickered at the edge of my vision, they became my world. And then one day, a new face walked in. A young woman, looking confused and wary, glanced around and met my eyes. I watched her, a pang of sadness filling my chest as she made her way to our table. Rachel smiled at me, a glint of relief in her eyes. She leaned forward, whispering so softly that only I could hear, "It's your turn to be found." As I felt myself fading, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the cafe's dusty window. My own eyes stared back, dark and hollow, like I'd been there forever. And as I faded from that place, I realized I'd be waiting, just like Rachel, for someone new to keep me company. Story, the end.
Story number 10.
It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and I was aimlessly swiping through Meet You, half asleep, when I saw her profile. Her name was Lila, and she had an intense stare, her dark hair covering half her face. Her bio read, "Don't swipe unless you're ready to find me." I thought it was a weird warning, but I swiped right, intrigued by her dramatic flair. Almost immediately, we matched, and a message popped up. "I was hoping you'd find me tonight." A chill ran down my spine, but I convinced myself she was just really into the spooky vibe. "Guess I'm lucky," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You're exactly what I've been looking for. Alone, awake in the middle of the night. Just my type." Okay, that was definitely a little creepy, but I wasn't about to let a stranger freak me out over an app. I decided to play along. "And what are you looking for exactly?" Her reply was almost instant, like she'd been waiting for that question. "Company, and maybe a way back." I didn't understand what she meant, but I felt this strange, uneasy pull to keep talking. "A way back? From where?" She didn't answer right away. I waited, watching the typing dots appear and disappear. Finally, a new message popped up. "Somewhere dark. Somewhere where you never leave." That was when I started getting really creeped out. I closed the app, telling myself I'd been watching too many horror movies. But then my phone buzzed with a notification from Mitu. "Are you done talking to me already, Alex?" I froze. I hadn't told her my name. I opened the app, staring at the message. She'd somehow guessed it. Lucky shot, right? But then another message appeared. "I knew you'd forget about me, but I'm not someone you can just swipe away." That was it. I'd had enough of her weird, cryptic messages. I went to unmatch, but her profile was gone. I scrolled through my list of matches thinking I'd somehow missed her, but it was like she'd never existed. I shut off my phone, feeling a surge of relief. The next night, though, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I opened Meet You again, partly out of curiosity, partly to reassure myself she really was gone. I swiped, half hoping, half dreading to see her profile again, but she wasn't there. Then I got a message. "Miss me?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. How was she messaging me? I'd checked, I knew her profile was gone. "How are you doing this?" I typed, my fingers shaking. "I told you, you can't just get rid of me." "Who are you?" I replied, desperate to know if this was just some elaborate prank. "I'm someone who's been waiting a long, long time. People like you pass through here, swiping left and right, looking for something you never really find. And I wait, hoping one of you will finally bring me back." My mind raced, my skin crawling. I couldn't tell if this was some hacker or if I'd fallen into some twisted nightmare. "Bring you back? From where?" The reply was immediate, and it sent chills down my spine. "From where I died." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This was insane. She had to be messing with me, but something in her words, there was a familiarity, a strange weight to them, as if she were speaking a truth that went beyond just scaring me. "If that's true, then why talk to me?" I asked, my hands shaking. "Because you're the one who noticed me. You're the one who found me in the middle of the night, alone. And now, I found you." I put my phone down, too freaked out to keep going. I forced myself to sleep, hoping that would be the end of it. But the next morning, I woke up to a notification from Meet You. My heart sank. It was from Leela. "Don't ignore me, Alex. I'm closer than you think." I deleted the app right then and there, convinced that would end it. But the messages didn't stop. They started coming through text, each one more chilling than the last. She'd tell me things about myself I hadn't told her, what I was wearing, who I talked to during the day, even where I lived. One night, I got a picture message. I almost didn't open it, but morbid curiosity got the best of me. It was a picture of my bedroom, but it wasn't just a picture. There was something in it, a shadow in the corner, something that looked just like her, lurking in the darkness, her face just barely visible. "I'm already here," she texted. I shut off my phone, convinced this was some trick, that maybe a friend was playing a prank on me, but I felt eyes on me in every room, like something or someone was always watching. I didn't sleep that night, but I had to go to work the next day. The texts didn't come, and I started to think maybe, somehow, it was over. That night I came home, exhausted, half asleep as I crawled into bed. My phone buzzed and I glanced at it, dreading what I'd see. One last thing. The air in my room felt colder as I opened the message. It was another picture, taken from the foot of my bed, looking down at me. In the image, my body lay still, pale, and unmoving. The bed was empty, save for the figure of Leela crouching at the end, her face a horrifying mixture of sadness and longing as she stared into the camera. She was real, impossibly real. As I sat there, paralyzed with fear, another message came in, though my phone was across the room now, untouched. "Don't worry, Alex. I told you, I'll never log out." My bedroom light flickered and went out, leaving me in darkness, a soft whisper filling the room. And in that pitch black, I finally saw her, standing right at the edge of my bed, her cold eyes locked on mine. Story the end.